Town is going to be presenting today. This is Sara Judd, the Director of Contracts and Grants, and this is Angie Karchmer, who is our Senior Grants Analyst. She's actually the one who deals with most of your proposals. So any of you who've submitted proposals, you've worked very closely with Angie. They're going to be doing a great sort of overview presentation of contracts and grants, how things work a little bit. This is part one of part two. There will be a part two on November 9th at lunchtime. They actually provided lunch today, so you can take this without. But if you could please also sign in at the back if you haven't. We have to submit a list of who's come to these events to make sure that we get funding so that we can do them in the future. And then the other thing is that aside from the research series workshops, we will be doing a lecture by a renowned scholar, McCall Kurlander, on November 15th from 3 to 4:30. It's on a lunchtime talk. We'll be providing tea and cookies, I guess. But McCall is a K-12 policy person from the University of California at Davis, and so she'll be coming down for a special talk on the 15th. Okay, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Catherine, and thanks so much for having us today. We're doing these across the campus community, both here and on our other campuses, really as a way to sort of get to know you a little better. We work very closely together, and I know sometimes our office has the reputation of being the red tape folks, but we're really here to help you navigate the challenges of administering grants, contracts, awards, as we move through that process. So we're really your partners, and we want to talk a little bit about the process, who does what, take an opportunity to talk about some things that we can improve. As we've done these brown bags in other areas, they've really evolved into discussions and open forums to talk about things that, you know, we can work on tweaking processes, be they processes here in the school or processes we have when we connect in those different interactions, and ways that we can really enhance the experience for PIs, research administrators as well. So that we can really make it a more, we are a team. Again, we may be in different offices, but we're here to support the research enterprise at USC. It's a big job. We all have different roles and responsibilities, so making sure we all understand what those are, where to go for what, and what the process is as well to make it all work more smoothly. I want to take just a minute to go around the room and introduce ourselves, so if you could let us know your name, if there's a specific subdivision that you work in here, and your favorite band in high school. Those are the three pieces of information we need to know from you. So you want to start in the back, Andy? Dave Matthews, that's a good one. All right. Name, where you're from, favorite band in high school. Where you're from in terms of what area you work here. Where are you from and what's your credentials? I'd like to see your resume. Just kidding.
Miguel Vasquez, I work under Dr. Overgusa, Giselle Overgusa here at the Center for Outcomes Research. My favorite band in high school is actually Nirvana.
Nirvana, all right. Okay.
I'm Lauren Anderson. I'm an assistant professor. I work in the teacher ed program and in the tennis program. And my favorite band in high school, I don't exactly know, but I'm sure something very like Boston-ish. Dirty, like big hair.
Gotcha.
You know.
All right. Excellent. Big hair band.
To narrow it down. Big hair.
Don't stop believing. All right, we got it.
Hi, I'm Brandon Martinez. I'm a faculty member in the MAT program, and I also teach in the EDD program. And my favorite high school band, which is still one of my top 3 bands, is Iron Maiden.
Wow. It's always fun to see the hard rockers. We want to know who the hard rockers are and really how old you are, right? This is what this is all about. We want to know.
Oh, it was my older brother's album, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it was my mom's. Right. Okay.
I'm sorry. Whenever I'm in a room with Brandon, I'm just like laughing the whole time in my head. Anyways, I'm Jamie Stillman. I'm an assistant professor. I work in the teacher ed program and the EDD tennis program. And this will date me. My favorite band in high school was The Cure.
Sure. Excellent. All right.
I'm Anthony Maddox. I'm a faculty member in MAT, and
You were okay. Oh, nice. All right.
I'm Morgan Polikoff. I'm an assistant professor in K-12 policy, and I'm not much of a band person, but my favorite musician in high school was probably Kylie Minogue.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So she was still a bandish, right? No?
Hi, I'm Jerry Lucido. I direct the USC Center for Enrollment Research Policy and Practice here. I'm a professor in education, and I'll carefully conceal my favorite band by just saying it was the Rolling Stones, so that takes me across many generations.
There you go. And even this one, right? They're still out there under the pavement, so excellent. All right.
I'm Susan Bush. I'm project manager at the Center on Educational Governance, and my favorite band is Radiohead.
Radiohead.
Susie Louise, I'm the budget analyst for the Center on Educational Governance, and I think they would probably big Fleetwood Mac.
Okay.
My name is Kathleen. I'm the assistant dean for research, and my favorite band in high school was Cake, because my friend was Cake. My friend was the drummer's girlfriend.
Oh, really?
So we got to go see them live. So
Wow.
I'm Shannon Needle, also I'm the contracts and grants coordinator for the roster school event, and I think it was split between The Cure and U2.
Christine Davis, manager of business services in the business office, and I guess if I had to pick a favorite, it would have been Boyz II Men.
Wow. All right.
I'm Donna Darling with the Center for Cognitive Technology, and I'll date myself, Three Dog Night.
All right. That's also a classic, though.
My name is Roxana. I work in the MAT program in Ohio Players.
You're what?
MAT,
Okay.
Ohio Players.
Ohio Players. I haven't heard of them, actually. Okay.
My name is Lucas. I work in the Office of Faculty Affairs, and my favorite band was probably Bon Jovi.
Bon Jovi. See, we have some hard rockers. You all are. So, Angie?
Angie Karchmer. I'm a senior contracting grant administrator in DCG, and my favorite band, and still one of my favorite bands, is the Smiths.
So, and I'm Sara. Bruce Springsteen, I'm going to have to say, still is one of those things. So, but again, it was my older sister. So, talk about somebody who's aging well. He was fabulous. So, all right, so we're going to get started. And really what we're going to talk about today is sort of who does what and what the process is. Oh, we want to know how old he is? How old are you? No, I'm just kidding. Is that the only one who came in? Okay, so your name, what area you work in within Rossier, and your favorite band in high school.
All right, John Pasquarella. I work in the area of 601D.
All right, smart Alec.
New media literacies and urban ed.
Okay.
And my favorite band in high school, P. Diddy.
What was it? P. Diddy? Really?
Daddy.
Really? No, I am going to ask how old you are. No, just kidding. So, no. Well, thank you for indulging us, everybody, now that we know a little bit about, again, our age and what we liked back when we were young and silly. So we're going to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities, and really we're going to focus on the proposal process. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along, answers, jokes, whatever. Again, this is designed to be an open dialogue and a forum for you to find out a little bit more about the process with the goal of really kind of enhancing everybody's understanding in these areas. So really why we're here is to provide a forum for information. Can you go back to that one a little bit? Uh-oh. Sorry, previous. I have a clicker. We're having to collaborate here. So provide a forum for information exchange so that we can maximize our communication, enhance our collaborations, because we really want to provide seamless support. So that support comes from Rossier, that support comes from DCG, a variety of other places around the university as we do human subjects, animal subjects, conflict of interest areas. So they're all going to play a part here. And really providing a true research support team. And ultimately, DCG's goal is to provide outstanding customer service. As you may know, there's some changes going on in our office, and all of those changes are with the goal of enhancing service to our community. So that's really why we're here. Click. So we're your partners, right? We're here to help, and that's the biggest message that we can send to you today, is that we're here to help. It's a complex arena and getting more complex every day with economical issues, sponsors imposing more terms, conditions, requirements on us each and every day. So we're really here to help you navigate that arena more efficiently. Click. This is us. Girl. No. So introducing your team, and ta-da, it's Angie. So we're actually recruiting for the other contract and grant administrator on Angie's team. We're getting very close to a final candidate, so we're very excited about that. So currently, Rossier has a 2-person team who supports them. Currently, that 2-person is 1 person with some help throughout our office as well. But Angie is going to be your primary point person, and many of you have already dealt with Angie in those activities that you deal with our office on. So let's talk a little bit about who does what. Lots of hats that we're all wearing. Look at you, you're trying to read my face. So first of all, one of our primary responsibilities is really reviewing and endorsing proposals on behalf of the university. So essentially what this means is prior to submission to a sponsor, those proposals need to be reviewed by our office. Anybody sent one to a sponsor without it going through our office ever? Amnesty, we won't tell on you. So we're really here to help you. Again, the reason that it needs to go through our office is we're looking for institutional issues. We're also helping to make sure that we complied with all the requirements that the sponsor may have. Sometimes what happens is when they don't go through our office, it can delay the award setup process. Because what happens is all of a sudden we get an after the fact proposal and it comes with an award, and there's a little fine print in the proposal that somebody signed that says we agree to all the terms and conditions at the time we submit this proposal. And in the terms and conditions it says, you know, we'll take your firstborn, all your IP, and everything's confidential, right? So we can help you with that, because that is a trend that we're seeing more and more, is that people are saying, or sponsors are saying, to expedite their award process at the time of proposal, here's your terms and conditions, speak now or forever hold your peace. So we want to make sure we're involved in that process on the front end so that we're not picking up steaming piles on the back end. So we're here to help you with that. We are responsible for negotiation and acceptance of awards and amendments on behalf of the university. So we're the folks who do that. We get the awards, we review, make sure they're okay and in compliance with the university terms and conditions. Often that includes some dialogue with the PIs or the research administrators to make sure that everything's okay with respect to the scope of work that you've understood, that you've agreed to, payment schedules, budget. If there are intellectual property issues, often we have discussions with PIs about that, because that tends to be a bone of contention with sponsors, and also that's sort of our intellectual capital, if you will, and what we do here, right? We are the liaison with the sponsor for administrative matters, so we're the folks who are going to be your primary contact with the sponsor. The one thing that we want to make sure we try and mitigate a bit is 50 people calling a sponsor about one issue, right? So we want to coordinate our communication as much as possible. Sponsors appreciate that as well, so that there's sort of one voice for the university. Understanding that we know researchers are communicating with their program folks, right, about the technical stuff. We certainly don't want to step into that arena. That's not what we do. That's what researchers do. So, but we are here for the administrative matters as a liaison. We coordinate and endorse prior approval requests. So anytime an agreement requires that we get prior approval for adding a subcontractor, for changing a PI, for changing scope of work, that type of thing, that request also needs to go through our office as well. We do compliance reviews as well to make sure folks are in compliance with various regulatory issues. We also do special agreements, so not just your straight funding agreements, but we do confidentiality agreements, we do teaming agreements where different institutions might want to work together on a particular issue or item. And we facilitate award closeout. So when all the work is done, we've submitted all our deliverables, our reports. We facilitate making sure that we get all the reports to the sponsors that are required. We close out, make sure that everything's closed out appropriately, and that we file it and store it with the appropriate time frames involved, and then destroy the files once we can, basically. Does that make sense? Everybody understand what we do? Mm-hmm. Click. Okay, so principal investigators' responsibilities. They're ultimately responsible for their overall conduct of the research. That means technical and administrative, right? We understand that we have support here for them with respect to the administrative part, but that whole responsibility is in fact theirs. So they're also responsible for identifying potential funding sources. We also have resources at the university to help with that. And they develop and prepare the proposals for extramural funding, making sure that they're in compliance with sponsor guidelines. And often that happens, that's a collaborative effort, right? A number of you identified yourselves as being in the business office or working with a particular researcher. So that usually happens where the researcher is working on technical pieces. There might be some budget development going on, obviously in collaboration. So there's a number of folks who might work on that. Making sure that cost sharing commitments are secured at the proposal stage, very important. And making sure that the proposal approval record is completed and signed. Everybody familiar with what a proposal approval record is? It's that form that needs to go with your proposal to our office. We're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail moving forward here. And those are really things that should be reviewed and signed by the PI. So you want to make sure there's a conflict of interest question in there specifically that we want to make sure is reviewed and signed by the PI, right? So we don't want administrators answering those questions that you may or may not have that information to answer, and later on down the road have some issues that may arise from that. Click. So submit the completed proposal package to our office in a timely manner for institutional review and endorsement. We all understand what timely manner is, right? How many? What's timely? Everybody think timely. 10 minutes before the deadline. Yeah. Where are we at with it? We always ask this question with brown bags. Like, what are we talking about in terms of when it gets to DCG? When does it usually get to our office? Dates, do you? Yeah? Is that the norm? Couple days? Couple days is pretty good.
Yeah.
We like a couple
We're
days.
aiming for a week, but we're slowly working.
Aiming for a week. Well, and that's great. I mean, because one of the things is it has to be a process both in your area and in our area, right? So my background is, when I was, 18 or 19. No, just kidding. My first job out of college was actually as a research assistant for a PI who did research in kids and nutrition. So Women's Health Initiative, you guys may or may not have heard of that. Dietary intervention study in children, kind of two big multi-center human subjects research clinical trials were two that she played a major role on. So I got to do all the stuff. So been there, done that. It takes really a lot of planning to make sure that it happens timely, and it's to everybody's benefit essentially. The researchers are working on the science. You want to make sure that that all comes together in a timely manner so that they're not coming up right against the deadline and submitting it. Because no longer are we submitting things via FedEx where we can drive to the airport. I mean, we had people who would fly to DC on the day it was due. I mean, we did all kinds of crazy stuff. But now that we have grants.gov, for example, and electronic research administration, where many of the submissions are electronic, we don't have that luxury anymore. So the bottom line is, if we get it before the deadline and we push the button and the system crashes or it's too busy and we can't get it through, that's where we're at, unfortunately. As many of you know, January 1st, I believe it's January 1st, NIH is removing that little grace period window that we used to have to sort of fix things. So that's no longer, that's going to go away. So that means we need to make sure we get them in timely. Yeah.
And just to reiterate the grants.gov situation, this happened in our school. We had a proposal that went in 50 seconds late and it got rejected.
Yeah.
Like literally 50 seconds after the deadline, and it was thrown out, not even reviewed.
I mean, it's on the clock. It's seconds down. You get a receipt,
Right.
tells you exactly, and 50 seconds.
Right, exactly.
And so 3 months of work gone.
Yeah.
So just sooner the better. You can speak to us.
Right. Yeah, and again, we're all here to help. So the sad thing is, and from our office as well, you know how much work went into that proposal, and to have it come down to literally 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We had some situations a few months ago where email systems went down, grants.gov went down. I don't know if you remember the snowstorms last year. The system went down. So yes, they make some accommodations for that, but we shouldn't bank on the fact that something's, they're going to give us a grace period for something. So really, really important. And again, the sooner you can get information to your admin folks, the more help they can be. The sooner we get it, the more help we can be in the review process. Because the other thing we've seen happen as well is when we're looking for compliance issues, if we don't have time to do that, here's what we do. If it comes in 5 minutes before the deadline, we click the button. So we look for institutional signatures, we look at the main things that we have to have in order to submit, because really the mindset for us is that we can always rescind that proposal, right? But we never want to be the reason that that thing didn't go in because we were saying, well, we really need to make this better. We don't want to be that person. So we're going to submit it, and then on a post review, if there's some reason that we can't submit it, we will rescind it. We've had situations where we've done a review, very brief because we didn't have time to do it, and it gets kicked back because the font size is too small. And they're doing that now because it's sort of similar to having a deadline, is that you're trying to even the playing field, right? So if I use tiny font and you use 20 font, I got a lot more science in my technical than you did because I use tiny words. So they're trying to level the playing field in evaluating these technical pieces. So that's one of the ways they can do that. Having a deadline is another way that they can do that, so they can review particular batches. So making sure that you understand that you run the risk when you're later of having issues that may actually get your proposal rejected or not even reviewed for a silly administrative issue, which you think is silly, but they're using as criteria to say, this is a requirement, it's a, we have to have it. So just keeping that in mind. Okay, so again, the PI is assuming primary responsibility for scientific and technical and the administrative management. So again, whole ball of wax, right? So that's responsible for everything. Hopefully they're getting support from the school in terms of reviewing budgets on a regular basis or reviewing actual expenditures on a regular basis, making sure they're appropriate. If they're not, making sure we resolve those and reconcile those and get them off if they're not appropriate. Reviewing subcontractor invoices, if you have subcontractors on your awards, making sure you're looking at them and that it corresponds with the work that's being done, or if you're having issues, resolving those as well. Corresponding with us regarding any potential post-award issues, if you need a no-cost extension. If you have some money left over, you're going to use it, it's taking a little longer, we need to get a carry-forward request, those types of things. Talking to us prior to when you need it, right? So you don't want to have your project end and say, oh yeah, I'm not done yet. So actually sponsors need to know that ahead of time, and many of them have a 30-day window that you have to get in before 30 days prior to the end of the project, for example. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Okay, click. Oh, okay. So department's dean's office responsibilities. Again, they're going to also serve as a liaison between the PI and DCG, and this really varies on your school. Every school is different. So depending on how your school is set up, these things might vary a little bit. So keep that in mind. In general, department's dean's offices may serve as a liaison. So as you're putting together the proposal, we might have budget questions. We'll call Shannon and say, hey, looks like these, we have a question about this. They serve as an information resource regarding sponsor guidelines and university policies. So it's really the department and the PI that are responsible for reading through those sponsor guidelines, right? And making sure we checked all the boxes of all the things we have to have in that proposal. We do a review as well, but it's your responsibility to make sure, we're not the ones that are going to do that first review and say, oh gosh, we missed all this stuff and we got 10 minutes to fix it, right? We don't want to be in that position. And really the folks that facilitate frequent communication with the PI about the business aspects. So there hopefully is regular communication with researchers about the management of their awards, right? So on a regular basis, we used to meet monthly with our PI, sit down with the expenses for all their awards, look at the expenses for the award, look at their funding. So we had horizon reports for their salaries. We were a soft money funded institute, so we'd say, hey, looks like next May we're in a little bit of trouble, that if you don't get 100% of your salary, you're going to get a pay cut. So those types of things. So making sure that they are aware of sort of what's going on with their funding picture. Okay. So specifically with proposals, what the department and dean's office generally do is assist with the proposal preparation, making sure that that proposal is prepared in accordance with USC policies and guidelines, as well as the sponsor guidelines. Often the sponsor will have specific guidelines, so making sure that those are taken into consideration. The department is also verifying accuracy of title and pay scales that are used in proposal budgets, assisting the PI with the routing of the proposal package for the internal department, school, and DCG approvals. Are you guys using Paris, by the way? Do you guys use Paris? No? Okay. So routing the PAR is really what that's talking about. And assisting again the PI with the submission of the DCG endorsed proposal to the sponsor. So in general, if it's not an electronic submission, we're going to give it back to you. We'll review it, sign it, and then we're going to give you the hard copy, and it goes back to the MacArthur Foundation or whoever you're submitting to. For awards, the department and dean is going to notify the PI when the continuation or renewal proposals and protocols are due. So those annual reports you might have, often many sponsors send annual notifications now. We're seeing that more and more. But hopefully the department is helping with that reinforcement, that those tickers, as you're setting up your awards in your departments, you're setting up a tickler file to say, hey, 30 days in front of this deadline, I'm going to send a reminder to the PI to get this report in. Routinely communicating again about fund balances, status of key purchases, blanket orders, POs that are needed, if we need a sub-award issued, that kind of thing. And again, talking, if you're meeting on a regular basis, you're going to have a sense of, hey, we're behind schedule, we need a no-cost extension, or we're behind schedule and we have money left over, we have to get a no-cost extension and ask that we can spend the money moving forward. Okay, click. So chairs and deans are really kind of responsible for the whole big picture, right? Making sure that the research in general fits within what the school's mission is. So when they review that PAR, that's really what they're looking for. And making sure that the external research we do is within our particular mission, right? So that's really kind of what they're looking at, as well as institutional issues, right? Cost sharing, if there's cost sharing involved, usually they're approving that as well. Click. Making sure we're committing USC resources appropriately, so personnel, if we need space for a particular proposal, making sure that we're going to have that space available or designated, and reviewing the projects to ensure that there's allowability, realistic projections, and that there's a source of funding identified if there is cost sharing or if there is other an advanced funding request is needed, that kind of thing. Does that make sense so far? Everybody knows who does what? All right. Proposal process, let's talk about that. How many people in here have submitted a proposal to DCG? Everybody? Yes? Or been involved? Somehow been involved? Excellent. Okay, so just in general the process, and we can kind of click through all of this. So the PI has an idea, he searches for funding opportunities, right? You may find them or somebody sends one to you. You review the sponsor submission guidelines to make sure you can, meet those particular criteria. Plan and write the proposal, identify any regulatory and USC review requirements. So if you're doing human subjects research or animal subjects research, making sure that you have to plan for those particular approvals to be put in place. Completing sponsor forms. Almost all sponsors these days, except for foundations, have particular forms that we need to fill out in a particular way. Filling out the appropriate USC forms, so the PAR, for example. Routing that proposal for chair and dean approval, submitting the proposal with any applicable corrections to DCG for review. So again, your school, and you can comment on this as well, the school usually does a review of the proposal before it comes to DCG. So there's some communication that happens there, then it comes to DCG. We do our institutional review, so there's separate reviews looking at slightly different things. And then we submit it to the sponsor if it's electronic, or we return it to you for submission to the sponsor if it's not. And that's really the process. So some special notes regarding getting approval. So when you're routing that PAR for approval, you want to make sure that you know who needs to approve what. So depending on the school, every school is different. So you may know internally who you need to route it for to. So in this particular school, it might be chairs and deans need to sign on everything. In the college or at Keck school, it may be the department chairs don't look at it, but the deans do. So making sure that if you're working on a collaborative proposal, you know who needs to sign for what for each PI who's involved. Does that make sense? Making sure that you understand usually a copy of the proposal is required for review by whoever you send it to. So again, for those collaborative proposals, I don't know, I'm kind of funny about this, but I don't like to sign stuff I don't read or that are missing big parts. I usually ask for those big parts. Chairs and deans are going to be the same way, right? So if you're routing a multi-center or a multi-department proposal to another school, you're going to want to make sure you include all the pieces, parts for them to look at, right? Whether or not they read the whole thing, their business, but at least they have all the information they need. And making sure that if you have a multi-school or a multi-department, you start routing it early, right? Because that's going to take a lot of time. So understanding that some of these signatures are coming from chairs and deans and directors. So it's not like they're sitting around all day doing their nails. That's what we do, but not everybody does that, I understand. So making sure you route that as early as possible to get it through the system. Okay. So for submission to us, we wanted to kind of lay out what the bare bones, what's the bare bones that we need to look at something. So we need, first of all, a copy of the proposal, including the PAR, to our office for review. In general, we like it 5 business days. There's actually a memo. Anybody remember the Randy Hall memo from a few years back saying things should be submitted to us 5 days prior, right? We haven't yet done the whole Randy's going to say no if we don't get them, right? We may get there. Some places do. But 5 business days really helps us because multiply yourself by the university, right? So on a big deadline day, we do hundreds of proposals in our office. So, you know, in particular individual people, for example, NIH deadline we had recently, we had one person who had 40 proposals. 40 due on the same day. What would happen if we got those 40 the day before or the day of, right? If you think of what's humanly possible, even if you're a really fast clicker, that's going to be kind of challenging, right? So understanding that that's also what you're looking at is if it's a first come first serve, we're going to get that turned back around to you. And the great thing about getting it to us 5 days in advance is you're like 4 days before the deadline. You get to walk around and tease all your friends. I got my proposal in. So you know, it's just it's nobody likes to rush. It's a lot of stress. It's self-imposed stress in some ways. So anything we can do to alleviate that is a good thing. So under no circumstances should we submit proposals to sponsors without prior approval, right? We did have an example, a fairly big example of a huge project that we had with one of the departments of transportation that was submitted without review, without signature. So they came back to us with an award, horrendous terms and conditions, went all the way up to Randy Hall, and he said, no, we're not going to sign this, we can't. Part of the reason he didn't sign it was because it didn't go through the process and we didn't have the opportunity to negotiate, because had we would have been able to negotiate those terms and conditions. But the sponsor was saying, you signed something that said you agreed to this at the proposal stage, so we're not going to negotiate with you now. So just so you know, it's super important that it goes through our office. If you submit a draft proposal initially, due to time constraints, making sure that we get a final proposal, we know that you have to work on the science sometimes up to the last 5 days, right? So if we get a draft of it, you know, make sure we get a final proposal for our records. So the bare bones minimum that we need to look at in terms of a review for our office, keeping in mind that we're doing an institutional review, is the completed and signed PAR. So we need the completed signed PAR. Everybody who needs to sign needs to sign. If they're out of the country, they can't physically sign, we will take an email confirmation, making sure they kind of follow up with that. We don't need an original ink signature. You don't have to walk it over to us. You can scan it and email it to us again if somebody's not available. An email confirmation that I approve this is fine with us, so we try to be as flexible as possible. A research plan and a scope of work. So to the extent that you have a draft research plan or at least a scope of work, that's something that we need as well as a budget and a budget justification. So those are really the 3 parts that we need that are critical to doing sort of a bare bones review. And I know a lot of people say, oh, I got this to you 5 days in advance, but we didn't, it's an electronic submission, and if we still don't get the whole proposal until 10 minutes before it's due, we're still in that same spot. So kind of keeping in mind that we can't, if it's electronic, we need all the pieces to submit. So we appreciate getting it in advance, but we actually need the whole thing to get it in there timely. So some of the other things that might be applicable, just keeping this in mind, if there is a solicitation or there's sponsor guidelines specific to that proposal, we need to see those too. If you haven't had them in advance, it's great to send them to us, and if we're able to look at them in advance, we will do that. Because really that's one of the things we're looking at too, right? To make sure we're in compliance with those sponsor policy and guidelines. Any copies of institutional approvals that are required. Most sponsors these days let us submit these at the time that they're going to award, so they don't have us. We used to have to submit IRB approvals with proposals. I don't know if anybody else, just me that old, or so. And if you think about, 25-30% of proposals that are actually funded, that's a ton of work. That's not necessary. For outgoing subawards, we may need scope of work, budget justification, and letters of approval from their subaward institution as well. We want to make sure that Northwestern knows that and approves the fact that they're going to do work with us, right? Any letters of collaboration from either folks who are going to be consultants, advisors, subcontracts. Cost sharing commitment letters, so if there is a cost sharing commitment from another area, then we need to make sure we have a commitment letter. Consultants, same thing, if they're going to consult with us, we normally like to have that. Sometimes sponsors will actually request or require this information as part of their proposal. Okay. Here's some additional information that are often required as well. So just keeping this in mind, NIH proposals specifically, NIH doesn't require one copy, but some sponsors do require an original plus X number of copies, for example. NIH are specific to these elements down here. Other sponsors are also kind of jumping on that wagon. So they'll ask for abstract and key personnel pages, bio sketches, facilities and resource pages, other support, so a listing of what kind of other support researchers may have. And reps and certs, usually with contracts, we have a set of representations and certifications that we have to sign in advance and at the proposal stage as well. So essentially, a little bit about the PAR, so that form that has to go with the proposal. We have to have it for every single externally funded proposal. So every one that goes out, we have to have this PAR. We use it for our data entry as well as our review process, so it's very important that we have that. It essentially includes all the required approvals on there. So again, we're getting the PI signature, the chair, the dean or the school area's approval that research has been approved to move forward. So that's important. It's important too to use our most current version. It has been updated recently, so here's the link for you. But making sure that you're using that most updated PAR, because I know some folks save them on their desktop and then they're using old versions. So some of the questions have changed and been updated, so making sure you're using the newest version. Okay. What takes so long? Did I wake anybody up when I did this? Okay, so common question we get in our office, what takes so long? Come on. Other than all the other stuff we talked about, 40 proposals on one day and that kind of thing. So things that can hold up your proposal review. We're missing the PAR, right? We're missing pieces that we need to review. So if it's incomplete, we're missing questions, we're missing signatures, that's going to delay the process a bit. If we're missing subcontractor consultant paperwork. So thinking about the subcontractor is really kind of a mini proposal, right? So we need a scope of work from them, we need a budget from them, budget justification, and an authorized letter from them as well, right? So that's going to take a little time. If you know you're going to have a sub involved, ask early, because that takes a long time. I mean, subs are one of those things that take a long time to get the information, right? It has to go through the same process that you have to go through for your proposal. So think of it in those terms, and that they have to route it through their guys, through their central office, and then to us for their sub piece. So don't tell them the day before your proposals are due that you need all that information, right? Cost commitments are different on the PAR than from the cost in the proposal. We actually kind of check that to make sure that we have the information on the PAR actually reflects what is in the proposal. So that's important because the PAR has those signatures, right? So they're signing up for that commitment, and if it doesn't match the proposal, we may have to go back, or in some cases it needs to be rerouted for approval if it's significantly off. I forgot that I put the sound on all these slides, so just want to make sure you're on your toes. So other things that'll hold it up if it's not prepared in accordance with the sponsor guidelines. So if you haven't used the guidelines to do your proposal, it may require you going back and redoing or revising some information. So important that you're using those guidelines. Those are really, that's the recipe for baking the cake, right? So the sponsor's saying, this is what we want in the cake, you need to put that stuff in. Making sure that the folks listed in the proposal are listed on the PAR in their particular roles. If components are just plain missing, so we don't have pieces of information, that'll hold it up, right? Because we need those pieces of information. So sort of master of the obvious. All right. Should we go back to that? Yeah, so we got fast fingers over here with the story. Okay. The last couple things that can hold up a proposal. So the budget is not in accordance with USC sponsor policy, right? So we make up our F&A rate, we don't have the right fringe rates, right? The graduate tuition and fees rates are incorrect, so all of those things, we're gonna say, go back and make the information right. For electronic submissions, how many folks have submitted FastLane, National Science Foundation, NSF proposals, where you have to give us access? So the sooner you can give us access so we can see your proposal, the better, and then we can actually review. So we're actually doing a review online versus paper. If you don't, and we promise we won't submit until you're ready to roll. So giving us access doesn't mean, you know, Fast Fingers over here is going to click submit. And or maybe, I don't know, maybe we have a whole different perception of that now. But giving us access so we can see it as soon as possible will help facilitate that review. So allowing access in the FastLane system. Again, incomplete grants.gov submissions. If information is missing or you don't have components in there, that's going to delay those submissions. Does that make sense? Because a lot of these systems, these electronic submissions have built-in errors. So grants.gov, for example, there's errors and warnings. So sort of hard and soft errors. Things that you can submit and it'll still go through, but you know, you're going to have this issue. Or things that just plain won't allow you to submit because it's a hard error. So keeping those things in mind as you're reviewing your proposal before it comes in. Does that make sense? How many people want to hear the snoring sound one more time? Okay, click. I'm a little nervous because I don't know if it's over next slide. That's good. Okay. So in preparation for an award, so we submitted the proposal, FedEx guy came, picked it up, copier didn't break, we're all excited. Now we're just waiting for the money to roll in. So making sure that, you know, in preparation for that award to be set up, we can do whatever we need to do to facilitate that process. So making sure that PIs, investigators, or folks who are going to be directly involved in the project have taken the grants management education course. Everybody taken that in here? So not, they do it online, or you can actually have people come out. I think they'll come out and do a presentation for you. That is a requirement, so we need to have that completed before we can actually set up your award. So if we get your award and somebody hasn't completed that course, we can't actually set it up. So that's one thing that'll hold. So if you know somebody hasn't at the proposal stage, right? Because I believe the question is on there, it says, have you completed it, yes or no? If it's a no, if I was an administrator, I'd go around tapping shoulders and saying, hey, mark no, you want to take that now so we don't have to worry about it at the award stage. Regulatory approvals, human subjects, animal subjects, if there's a conflict of interest issue that hasn't been reviewed and approved, making sure that that's done prior. If it's done at the stage that we get the award, then understand that that's going to be a little bit of a delay. Again, information that's missing, if at the time the award comes in, we have a subcontract, you want to get it out ASAP, and we don't have the sub information, that's going to delay the issuance of that subcontract. If we never got the proposal or the PAR through DCG, that's going to be a delay, right? Because this is the first we're seeing it. It's usually in those circumstances, at the time we're getting it, it comes with everything, right? The PAR, the agreement, and it's a rush, it needs to be signed tomorrow or we lose the funding, right? How many people think that's a true scenario? Happens every single day. Pretty much. We get it a lot. So making sure that it goes through prior so that we can review those terms and conditions in advance versus at the 11th hour. Okay. So that's pretty much the outline of the process. In terms of proposal process, a little peek at award processes. So one of the things we want to open it up to, first of all, is questions, but also for future brown bags, what do you want to talk about? And in the next brown bag, we thought about going a little more detail in terms of process for proposal preparation, if you want to do that, but it's really up to you. I mean, these really are designed to be the most helpful to you. So what types of areas, issues would you like to discuss, focus on? These are some of the common areas that folks in other schools and departments that we've covered with them. But it's open. It can be whatever it is you need it to be. If you want to talk about processes for setting up a process in your school for submission of proposals, those types of things, we can certainly do that. Whatever, it's open. Ready, set, go. Questions? Yes.
Well, I think also we should be aware of that there is a restructuring going on in the Office of Research with Randy Hall now being overseeing contracts and grants. Before it was in the Office of Compliance. And the university has convened a research administrators task force to review all of the administration processes for research for the university and possibly changing or reworking a lot of different aspects. So you'll be getting a lot of information. So whereas this is really good, there may be some updates and changes with forms and processes and the structure of how research administration will be on campus. That's very likely to happen.
Absolutely, and that's really a 360 process. So it's not just DCG, but it's out in the schools, the departments, it's the whole, all of the players who support, again, the research enterprise here at USC. So it's a very exciting thing, so, and a much needed thing in terms of moving processes forward to really facilitate the research here at USC. So.
And if you have any questions, I'm our representative on the Research Administrators Task Force. So if you have any ideas or issues or concerns related to research administration, please tell me, because we're working on revamping. When you saw the roles and responsibilities, Randy Hall sent out a memo about a week ago with the updated, the partnership memo with the updated roles and responsibilities. I know the Administrator Task Force and DCG is working on a matrix, which will be online, which will have everybody's roles and responsibilities marked out and questions and FAQs and things like that too. So.
One question that I typically get from most of my faculty is they understand, like, if there's an RFP, if they're applying for, you know, some type of a funding. It's when it comes in the reverse, when one of my faculty is, you know, talking to somebody from a foundation that they've worked with, and then the foundation over dinner or whatever agrees, oh, you know, we're gonna fund that, and they come in and they say, I got a check and I got a letter, and they don't understand that that's still a grant. It still needs to go through the process.
Right.
And I've had that like several times that I already have the money, why can't I just put it in? And I'm like, in what account are we gonna put it in unless we set it up? So I think there's the question of, which is probably in the, it's in the CNG curriculum, grant versus gift.
Right.
So can you kind of like give a little outline of what a grant is versus what a gift is, so that then we can.
So the biggest sort of the easiest delineation between the two is a gift doesn't have any strings attached, right? It's the holidays. I'm going to give you a present. I'm not going to come back and say, well, Shannon, I gave you that, so I'd like a report about what you did with my present, and I'd like to see, you know, who you played with my present with, and if you don't do what I think you should do with it, I'm going to take it back. So a gift is no strings. It's money here. It may be focused to say here cancer research or here K through 12 policy research. So it may be focused in that way, and they may say we just want a final financial report. But essentially a gift is just that. It's here, we're giving it to you, it's irrevocable, they can't take it back, right? Based on whatever performance is being done or what happened or what they think should have happened to it. So really the qualification for a gift is it's really no strings, it's irrevocable, it can be focused, it's generally no performance period, so it'll be here it is, you know, we don't care if you spend it within this particular time frame. A grant, again, is going to be a little bit more, there's more parameters to it. Generally, there's a period of performance. Normally, there's a scope or a focus of it. Normally, there's some requirements. So, reporting requirements, it may be a particular scope of work, either the PI scope of work or the agency scope of work. But there's going to be some strings, right? So, there's going to be some requirements. In order to get that money, we need to do this. Often, there is a diligence requirement. In other words, you need to do this work, and if you don't do it, we're gonna take it back. Or if we don't see progress being made, we may take it back, we may cut your funding. You know, they have a number of options that they can take to ensure that what they've paid for, given you funding for, is actually occurring. A contract is sort of the next step in the extremes, in that a contract is really a procurement mechanism. So they're buying services, and in our case, it's really research is our service, right? So very stringent requirements normally, so very specific terms and conditions. We're going to talk about what we can do with IP, confidentiality, governing law, indemnification, specific performance period. Payment schedule might be tied to deliverables, so you give me, you know, this policy statement here, and we're going to pay you here, and then you give me this here. Very specific. We can take the money back if you don't do what we ask you. Often contracts are the sponsor scope of work, or primarily the sponsor scope of work with a little bit of PI infusion there. So it's very specific. So there's lots of strings usually with a contract, very specific. Does that make sense? And working with foundations can be very challenging because that happens all the time, right? That's sort of the way that they do business is often through relationships or connections with who you know, and you go to an event or you go to a dinner and yes, you end up saying, oh, they want to fund us, or oh, I got a check and I'm walking around with a $50,000 check after I went to Morton's, you know? So one thing I think to educate your researchers on is that it still does need to go through the process. So even though we understand that there's some more informal interactions that may occur, that if there's a scope of work being written and submitted, we need to, that's a trigger to say we need to go through the process. If it's a conversation and I happen to be so good that I come out of it with a check, then you need to come in with that check the next day and say, I need to do a par for this, and here's what it is, and I got to write a scope of work if I haven't done that already. So it still has to go through the process. At that point, we may want to make the determination, is it a gift or a grant? You know, it may or may not be clear, you know, or if we have a grant letter, you know, making the determination whether or not it's a gift or a grant. But understanding that it's a little different working with foundations, we understand that, but it still means that you need to understand, and part of the issue is too, making sure your researchers communicate that to the foundation. So in other words, if a researcher says, oh yeah, you can have all my IP, I will keep everything confidential ever that you say to me, you know, understanding we work for the university, right? Until it's Sara University, I can't agree to those terms. So understanding that if that agreement comes in with terms that need to be negotiated, we will need to go back and negotiate. So that ultimately the researcher does not have authority to negotiate on behalf of the university. So it's very important that they convey that to the foundation to say, hey, you know, this looks good, you know, making sure that all the terms and conditions are appropriate. We do business with most of the major foundations, many of the littler foundations. We do business with tons of folks, so we're usually always able to work out terms and conditions. So, you know, we're familiar with working with them, so they know about working with us. But just important that the researcher knows he can't make those commitments on behalf of the university, and having them communicate, hey, we have a little process this will need to go through, just so you know. If it requires a co-signature, you know, we need to endorse the letter as well, that we have a process so that the foundation understands that there's a particular process and associated timeline. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Thought I saw questions back in the back. No? Just people nodding off? Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Other questions? Things you want to chat about? What do you think we should talk about for the next brown bag? What's your favorite band was and
collaborations with other schools.
Collaborate with other schools at USC or with other external to USC?
Both, but primarily at USC.
Okay.
And international schools as well.
Okay. Specific issues that you want to chat about?
Well, so if I go through this whole process as a collaborator on Annenberg grant, Annenberg's applying, do I need to go through your office?
You generally, what will happen is the primary school, who's sort of the lead on it, or let's say the PI, and there's some co-PIs over here. The person who's the PI is normally the place where that's going to be submitted to DCG via that place. So what will happen is they're responsible for collecting all that other information from the other schools, which means routing the PAR, right? So they may ask you for some salary and fringe information, how much do your students get paid, or, you know, what kind of equipment do you need to put into their budget, and then the same routing will need to occur. So in other words, they'll route the PAR with the information to get signed by you and the folks at Rossier who need to sign that PAR. So the routing will occur and include you. You may not be the person who's responsible for getting all the information for the whole thing, but you will be involved in that routing. Does that make sense? And obviously you probably participate in writing the technical piece, maybe putting together some other pieces.
So it's up to the PI in other words?
It should be up to the PI and the department's, the PI's department.
Can there be co-PIs at international universities then, overseas? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Other universities in the country, outside of the country, yeah. So it's, again, a little bit more challenging in terms of time to get that information together, especially if you're working with international universities. Maybe some issues with respect to, you know, other things that you may be able to decipher at the proposal stage, like IP. IP is a little different outside of the United States, how folks feel about IP versus in. So may be helpful to have that discussion, you know, depending on what the scope of work is, prior to getting involved, or making sure everybody's on the same page with that.
And I think for me, I just wanted to make a point that the reason that we have contracts and grants and that we have school approval is that all proposals, even you as the PI, are not awarded technically to you. You're the steward of it. It's awarded to the university. And the reason for that is because the university assumes the majority of the liability, whether it's insurance issues or protection or all of these other things that you as an individual, like you don't want to be sued, right, as an individual. If something goes wrong, the university accepts the majority of the liability, and therefore that's why there needs to be all these processes to, one, protect the PI and also protect the assets of the university. So it's very important that people don't go off and sign these legal documents, because you're not only putting yourself at risk, but you're putting everybody else's research at risk too. Because if a funding agency, sometimes they'll withdraw funding from everybody. So somebody screws up on a grant and they say, you know what, we're not going to fund USC at all, and we want to pull all of our funding. And that's happened at universities. So we have to be aware that you're not in a vacuum and you're not by yourself. And I know that your work is important, but you don't want to mess it up for everybody either. So it's this sort of give and take relationship. So it's very, very important that you do get the appropriate signatures, because, like, you know, you have to think of it this way. If you were by yourself and you went and said, Professor X, I'm going to apply for $10 million from the Department of Defense, and you're not affiliated with anything, will they just sign a check for you for $10 million? Probably not. I mean, you know, so the $10 million check, it is actually made out to the University of Southern California, and you are responsible for overseeing it. So that's how it kind of works.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, again, thinking about all the facilities you have to do your research, and you wouldn't have them if you weren't here. But definitely making sure, again, that everything is within the mission of the university, and what we want to make sure that it fits, right? So those are some of the school approvals that happen as well, to make sure that all goes hand in hand. So in addition, you know, if you're not authorized on behalf of the institution to sign and you sign it, it's not binding. And so that's happened too, where we've had to go back to the sponsor and say, you know, in addition to the PI signing a publication restriction, which is problematic, right? You can't publish anything, oopsie. To have to go back to the sponsor, which is a federal agency, and say, sorry, you know, this person actually doesn't have authority, really sorry, and P.S., we can't accept this language, we need to negotiate it, doesn't really set the stage for a very fun conversation, or, you know, that affects the relationship, or could affect the relationship as well. And as Catherine mentioned, definitely sponsors are much more in tune with leveraging the funding they have at universities. So one of the other trends, in addition to potentially pulling funding, is if you're late with your progress reports. This is a favorite DoD strategy, is that if Angie's late with her progress report, they won't give me my year 2 funding until Angie submits her progress report. And they look at it in an institution. I was at a meeting a couple months ago, at an FGP meeting, and the lady from NASA was walking around with a spreadsheet in her pocket. So she sat down. I'm like, oh, NASA lady, you know, how are you? And she's like, oh, we're USC. She pulled out her spreadsheet. I was like, oh Lord. She was literally tracking down people who had not submitted their progress reports at this meeting. I was like, God love her, but that's, you know, they're very diligent about this, because now especially with the whole transparency thing, you know, with the Obama administration, they want to make sure they're getting a bang for their buck, right? And that they can explain, how come we haven't seen X, Y, or Z, or how come you're not being diligent, federal agency, and monitoring the folks to whom you gave $10 million, or however $1 million it is. So it's not only sort of the ARA money, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act money, but that's now spilling over as an approach to all the money that they fund. So something to keep in mind.
And then another thing to be aware of in terms of the grants administration side, federal agencies do look at your quarterly reports in terms of spending. So if you're spending too fast or you're spending too slowly, they can pull your funding. So those are really important things to be aware of while you're managing your grants, is that you're spending at a rate that is quote unquote reasonable, and if you're not, that you have reasons that you can explain why. Like, why did you spend 80% of year 1 in the first 2 months? Or why it's month 11 and you still have 75% of your year one still there. Why is that? So those are issues that as a PI as well, you want to be aware of when you're working with your staff, or as an administrator, that you're aware of, why aren't we spending at this rate? Is there a reason? You know, are we going to be spending a lot at the end because, you know, that's when we're doing all of our data collection. So it has to make sense, but you as a PI will be responsible to make sure that that's happening, because the federal agency is going to contact you.
Good point. Everybody's sufficiently scared now.
I was going to say, to add to what Catherine said, that ties in with commitment, time commitment, and effort. The effort reporting, which is something a lot of people don't understand how it's tied together.
Right.
When you commit, what the PI commits as time on the PAR is, that's what he's promising, or she. That's the time they're promising, and that effort that they certify every month, every quarter, should reflect that commitment that they have.
And that gets audited, by the way.
Yes,
So
it gets
not
audited.
too long
A lot
ago.
of people aren't aware that they're tied together.
Yeah, our A133 auditors were here, so they're pulling files, they're looking at a whole bunch of stuff. So that's all auditable information. So it needs to match. Really important. Other things? So collaborations, we want to talk about at the next one. Any other topics that you'd like to explore?
Independent contractors versus subcontractors.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good topic. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a common topic that we cover. So,
And
is there a difference? Anybody think there's a difference?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And one last thing, if anybody gets an audit report, please do not talk to people. Call our audit services immediately. Do not discuss anything, do not disclose anything, do not give them anything. Just say that we will put you in contact with our audit services department. So if you get a phone call or a summons or something, please immediately, but do not contact them. That's very, very important, because you don't want to give them access to things that we don't necessarily.
We have a department on campus called financial analysis, and they are our liaisons for audits, and they're the ones we call immediately.
Right. And definitely don't say, "Oh, my money's all one big pot."
For sure. Come on,
say that too.
I've actually had a PI that I worked for at the previous university that I worked at who said, "Oh yeah, come to my office." So the IRS and the Department of Labor came to the office and then ended up auditing the entire school. Because he's like, "Oh yeah, no problem, my records are fine."
Yeah.
So he came in and then they're like, "But that's not in compliance and this isn't in compliance." And so they ended up auditing the entire school, and they were at the university for 2 years digging up paperwork.
Yeah.
So please, you know, as soon as you hear that, say that I will be in contact with you, and I will have my representative from the university contact you as soon as possible. And they will do that, but don't invite people over, don't give them information.
Right, because they can look at anything. If there's a file anywhere, if it's in the file, they can look at it. So that's the other thing when you show up to an audit meeting, don't bring anything. Yeah, I can get that for you. But you don't come prepared and say, "Oh, here's all my purse, dump it out on the table."
Well, because the university has central, we have central offices,
central
sponsored
files.
projects, accounting, contracts and grants. They hold the files for all of us. So it's not what's in your file cabinet, but the university can run specific reports. They'll ask them exactly what they want. So it's not the paper that you wrote on or whatever. It is a specific based on what they need. Not any more, not any less.
Right.
So.
And those are the Office of Records. So there's different offices that are the Office of Records. So for sponsored projects, accounts, the administrative records are in our office. We're the Office of Records, so that's who gets called for that. But as Catherine mentioned, we all keep records. You know, there's records all over the place on these various projects, and what you have in your file is not going to be necessarily something that you'd like an auditor to look at. It could be a note to Catherine saying, "What the heck happened here?" and it looks like this. So they can look at that. However, if they come on out to your office, they actually could look at that. So that's what you don't want them to do. And I'm not suggesting that anybody's got bad stuff in their files. I'm simply suggesting that what we want the Office of Record to deal with them. We want the folks who are appropriate to deal with the auditors and not have you have to deal with that. I don't know if you've ever dealt with auditors before, but they're not the most scintillating group on the face of the planet. But you know, it's not part of your job, so we don't want to burden you with that in addition. So. Other questions, answers, jokes? More lunches back there. All right, so collaborations, ICAs and subs, So that's a good start for the next one, I think. So, is this useful? Does this help a little bit?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thanks so much for
I think probably reporting.
reporting.
Like focusing on both financial and also technical reporting and closeout. I don't think a lot of people are as familiar with what happens. Or what happens when an award is.
Okay, great. Thank you everybody for coming, we appreciate it.